Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today I'm going to paint my 100th painting for this channel, and I wanted to do something special. I have here the watercolor I did for my original logo, and I still really love this. I love the color wheel motif, I love the texture of it, but the problem is I've never done watercolor on this channel, so I wanted to do this in acrylic, and I had to find something I liked. I thought about changing the colors, the pattern of it, or how it would be on a canvas, and different types of acrylic paint and different textures I could use to make something different. So I did lots and lots of testing to get something I liked. The first few tests I did were with my acrylic paint. I used my regular heavy body paints and tried a few different things. I did a lot of texture on these ones in particular and used my palette knife to apply it in a radial color wheel pattern. This one I tried with all blue colors because blue is my favorite color, but I still really like the saturation and the color wheel motif of this one. But both of these I didn't love. They were okay, but I didn't love them enough to make them my logo for the foreseeable future. I wanted to bring that texture, that salt texture that was with the watercolor, but into acrylic. And there's only a couple ways you can really give something a unique random texture, and I thought doing an acrylic pour painting would work really well. So that was my next batch of tests. When you do acrylic pour paintings, you learn very quickly that the more colors you have, the more chance you have of muddying something up or losing one of the colors you really wanted to have in the piece. So these were some of my first pour tests, where I did every color in the color wheel. This one turned out particularly cool, but it was so hard to control that I wasn't sure I liked doing it that way. It was too random and I wasn't happy with the result. There are some really cool things happening in here, and I think it's a really cool piece on its own, but I didn't love it enough to be my logo. This one was a bit more random, where I just poured each color and I lost a lot of the red and some of these were too dark, so it was just way too random for me and I didn't like how it turned out. I also tried using a lot of different colors, different color schemes, and getting rid of the color wheel rainbow. So I wanted to show some of those off and show you what happened with all of those tests. I did a lot of tests with different colors, analogous color schemes where we have colors next to each other on the color wheel. When you start adding in complements where they're opposite each other, you start to get mud. So I was trying a lot of different analogous color schemes to see if there was something I like. This one in particular turned out super cool. I just didn't love it for my logo. I'm still kind of stuck on the color wheel scheme. This one turned out a lot different dry than when it was wet. This had green in it, there was a lot of different other colors up here, but it all dried very dark, and you can't even really see what colors I had poured there originally. However, it does look super cool, and it looks kind of like Mars or the surface of the sun with the space in the background, so I thought it turned out neat. I had some small canvases where I did mini paintings with analogous colors or monochrome like this blue one here, trying to look at the blues I had done with the heavy body paints. And then I did one that was still a rainbow color with the color wheel, and it turned out like mud. And everything was mud, and I was super upset, and I was like, I wasted all this paint. So I took the remainder paint that I had mixed for the day for the pour, and I dripped it on top of it and let it dry, and it turned out really cool. I just wasn't happy with it at the time, so I sort of panicked and dropped all the paint on it, but it has this really cool confetti texture to it, and I think that turned out neat in the end. I was just really upset at the time. For my last few tests, I stuck with analogous colors because they would not make mud as I poured them on the canvases. This was a warm color scheme, and there's some cool things happening here. I just didn't love it. The same with this. I decided to pick my favorite colors for analogous. Green going into a pink. I thought, those are my favorite colors, let's just pour it on the canvas and see what happens. Again, it's really cool, I just didn't love it. I'm still in love with that rainbow color wheel motif. So I decided to try it with vertical stripes, so I wouldn't end up with some of these contrasting colors mixing together and making mud. This time it turned out really cool, and I'm super happy with this. So let's try it full size on a wooden panel. First, I want to talk about my supplies. I'm doing this on a wooden panel that I've gessoed with a few coats of acrylic gesso, and I went with wood instead of canvas because on canvas, and I have a little mini canvas here, there's a negative space on the back. And so if you pour on top of the painting, there's like gravity takes over and pushes it down from the center, so you get a puddle of the acrylic pour right in the center. And with wood, that does not happen. So I went with a wooden panel for this particular pour painting. I have some cups to mix up all of my different colors for the pour, gloves because I don't really need any of this under my fingernails or on my hands, paper towel, this is what I'm going to be doing the drag with to pull the colors, water because my paper towel needs to be wet, popsicle sticks because I need to stir up all of the mixes for the colors. I also have color pouring medium, which is something that you mix your paints into to help with this particular technique. You want to use something like this because it's going to level, and that means it's just going to flow across the piece and have a nice flat layer, and it doesn't craze where it gets cracks in it, and it keeps it nice and flexible as the piece moves around and with humidity changes. And the very last thing I have are all of my paints. I'm using High Flow by Golden, and I have different colors for almost all of my colors for my color wheel. This is Phthalo Green Blue shade, Phthalo Green Green shade, Ultramarine Blue, Permanent Violet Dark, Quinacridone Magenta, Naphthol Red Light, Hansa Yellow Medium, and I also have Titanium White, which is going to be my base layer, but I'm also going to mix it into all of these to make them a little bit lighter because my last logo was very light and I really liked that look. I'm going to mix up one of my colors here on camera so you can see it, but they're all going to be mixed up the same way. And I'm going to just protect my panel with a piece of plastic because I don't want any color on it yet, and put one of my cups there so you can see it. Now the directions on the color pouring medium are about 10 parts color pouring medium and 1 part paint. They do recommend using a fluid acrylic, which is a little bit thicker than the paints I'm going to be using with the High Flow, but I've been estimating it and it's turned out pretty good, so I'm just going to continue to estimate, and it's approximately that same measurement. I'm just going to start with Phthalo Green Blue shade because it's going to be first, and I'm going to shake it up really well first. I find that especially the ultramarine blue separates a little bit. It doesn't harm it at all, but it's probably good practice to shake these ones in particular. And this is probably why I should have put on gloves first, but that's okay. I'll wash up with soap and water when I'm done. And because I wanted all of my colors to be a bit more pastel than they're solid saturated, I'm going to mix some titanium white in with each of them, and that amount is going to change based on the color. Some of them are a bit darker, and some of them are already a bit lighter, like yellow's a bit lighter, and I can always add more paint. It's a lot harder to add in more color pouring medium than it is to add in a few more drops of white or phthalo blue. And I'm just testing this on a paper towel, and I think it's not opaque enough, that I have to add more paint. I've mixed up all of my colors, and I have to start by laying down white. This is going to be a base layer to help everything else spread out very nicely. And I'm going to give it a very thin coat. So I'm just going to drizzle this everywhere and then smooth it out with my palette knife. Now it's time to start pouring the colors, and I'm going to be very careful when I drizzle this because I don't want to have too much. I want it to have some white space in between, and I want them to blend, so I do want to have a little bit go into where the next color is going to be. Now it's time to drag the colors, and I have this paper towel and I'm just going to get it damp and then spread it back out so I can pull it across the entire surface. So I just want to make sure that it's sitting across everywhere and then pull evenly and smoothly across everything. And I think that turned out well. I've noticed that when I've been doing these, where I start the paper towel, it picks up a little bit too much paint. So I'm going to put this paper towel down so I don't get paint on anything else. And I'm going to lift up this side of the canvas so that as it dries, all of the paint just slides a little bit to fill in this area here. So here's that attempt dry, and there's some really cool things happening here. I really liked when I had the white paint come through in the different areas, but I don't like when it gets to be the solid color field. And some of these just didn't blend together, almost like they dried too fast. So I learned a lot doing this full size. Everything up until now had been a small version, and it was a lot easier to control when you have less paint and less area you have to worry about. So what I want to do next is I want to try this again because I have another one of these wood panels. This time, for example, when something was wet like this, I can drizzle more white paint through some of these darker areas to get some more of this blending going on. I can also pay a little bit more attention so I don't end up with something like this. So let's try this again, attempt number 2. And here's panel number 2 dry. I really love how this turned out, and this will be replacing the watercolor wherever I was using that. The intro to my videos, there's a transition I use sometimes with it, any social media logos, this will be the new thing for all of those. Now, I had to do all of this testing and experimenting because I didn't know what I wanted going into this. All I knew was I want to take the watercolor and do something acrylic for the background. I didn't know what, but I had to do all of these tests to figure that out. And it's always important in your art to play around with the different media you're using, whether that's clay or paint or fabric. You need to play around and learn how it works, how the colors interact with it, and how things come together. So while this was a lot of fun, it was very important for me to figure out exactly what I wanted, what colors I wanted to use or stick with in this case. And the first panel I did was important because it taught me how to refine the technique I was using to make it exactly what I wanted. If I had just stuck with that, I wouldn't have gotten all of these cool areas or learned I needed to add more white paint in some of the areas where there was too much color to break that space up. So always, always practice. It makes a huge difference in your work no matter what you're doing. So I'm going to be keeping both large panels because I want them to decorate my studio, but all of the experiments I did are going to be up on eBay for auction. So if you're interested in picking up a splash of color for your wall, consider checking out those links. All of them I showed off will be on there, including some I didn't show off, so definitely check those out. There will also be new merch on my Redbubble with the new background for my new logo, because I don't really think I've had merch before with my logo on it, so definitely check that out if you're interested in picking something up. If you're interested in supporting me on Patreon, you can check out supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for the next MalMakes video.